Okay, hi everyone, thanks for hosting us. I'm Ben, and this is Marina, and we're from the EUCI, that's the European Crypto Initiative. First of all, compliments on the great tech ecosystem you've got set up here in Israel. It's very impressive, but of course, with success come the lawyers. And that's why I think Marina is going to give us a brief overview of the Market in Crypto Assets Directive, that is the MiCA of the EU, how it works, the basic sort of broad scope of it, and then we'll take some questions about how it's going to affect the Israeli ecosystem and what you need to look out for. So yeah, Marina, take it away.
Thank you, Ben. So congratulations again for everyone organizing this event, and having this legal room is not something that happens in every conference. So I think that was very, very well thought of. So the aim of this discussion today is really to help you better understand what is MiCA bringing for you. What is MiCA bringing to the table for the founders and for the developers, and why it is important for you, and why would you need to even care about it. So one of the most important things is that it regulates the market, which means that even if you are incorporated in Israel or if you're incorporated anywhere else, we had the discussion before, Cayman Island or anywhere else in the world, if you want to access the European market, you will need to be compliant with MiCA. That's number one. And then I think you will need to look into, okay, are you interested in that market or not? If you're not, you're okay, you don't need to know about MiCA. Even if you're not, maybe you would need to know a little bit what's happening there, just because, again, as it was mentioned before, all the other jurisdictions are looking into MiCA because it is the first law worldwide, like globally, that regulates crypto assets. It regulates the issuance of crypto assets, of different kinds of crypto assets, and also crypto asset service providers. We know that there are like delegations from other states coming to Brussels, wanting to learn more about MiCA. We're also talking to other organizations around the world, and they want to see what we did, maybe improve it, for their own sake, of course. But at the same time, I think it is quite an interesting framework. And I would like to start with the good things. So what is good about MiCA? The first thing is that it regulates European market in the same identical way. So MiCA is a regulation, which means that it will be directly applicable to all the member states. And if you like, I don't know, if you speak French, if you would like to go and apply, if you need the license to the French regulator, you would go there. But then through the passporting regime, you would be able to offer services all around Europe. So that's very easy. And this is not what's happening at the moment in Europe, because we have some member states that have regulation, some member states that have zero regulation. So it's very, very hard and in a way fragmented for you to enter this market. The other very good thing is that the European regulator thinks, at least to our perception at the moment, that most of the tokens we know today that we call utility tokens and are listed on exchanges, most of them are called crypto assets, which means that the majority of them would not be securities. So this is a speculation, of course, but from how we read MiCA, that would be the case, which means that MiCA in a way is a copy of the financial regulation to a certain extent, but is much, it's not as strict as the financial regulation. So in a way, it means that this is good news. It's good news for anyone that wants to issue a token. If you want to issue a token and offer it to the European Union market, you need to write a white paper. So very similar as you know about a prospectus when you issue shares, when you sell shares, you have this white paper. There are some parts that are obligatory to be written in the white paper, even one part that is very interesting that talks about energy consumption of your token and of your blockchain. So there's going to be a lot of consultants in the future that are going to do this like energy evaluation of how much energy you spend. Yes, and also there is kind of a not very friendly, I would say, ideas about what Bitcoin is and all the proof of work blockchains. So this is one part. And what is also nice is that there needs to be a notification. So before you issue a token, you need to notify this to the National Competent Authority, but there is no need for them to basically approve it. You can just notify them and then you can issue the token. The idea here is really to share as much information as possible for the consumers. So the consumers are informed and the consumers are also, in a way, the marketing is done in a correct way. So there's a lot of rules about marketing. There also needs to be disclosure that this specific thing is a marketing communication. So that might be a little bit burdensome and from a very operational point of view. The other thing is that if your token or whatever you're issuing is a stable coin, the rules are much, much more stringent. So for the utility tokens that we know, the rules are not that stringent. For stable coins, they are. So the stable coins need to write a white paper too. There's more information there to write, and also there need to be an approval, and they need to have a license. So decentralized stable coins that are not licensed are prohibited in Europe. So there is no exception for that. And what I would say, maybe the consequence would be that some of the tokens that would not be compliant will probably be delisted from exchanges. And some exchanges will have different policies around who to list, who not to list. But I would say that we will have kind of a standard of what tokens are safe and what tokens are going to be listed. And again, this is just important for the European market. So if there's no interest to be listing in European market, this is not important for you. The stable coins, again, are regulated in a way where they need a license. And also, unfortunately, what MiCA says is there is a cap. So there is a cap of 200 million transactions per day when you use stable coins for payment in Europe. So let's stop a little bit and think about what this even means. First, we need to know what transactions are happening in Europe. So we need to, in a way, track all the transactions. Then there needs to be a repository with all the information, what is the volume. And then the issuer needs to follow this and kind of collect this information. And when the cap is reached, MiCA says two things, which are, I think, quite important. One is that if this continues, the license could be lost. And the other things that says is that the issuer needs to stop issuing the stablecoins, which again, maybe doesn't make that much sense, but this is what it says. And I think that that will be the most challenging part on how to comply with MiCA. There will also need to be reports, quarterly reports on transactions, the number of transactions, the users of these tokens. And I think what is important here is that whenever you do not fulfill this report or whenever the cap is reached, you can still again lose the license. So for any stablecoiner issuers, there's going to be a really, really big challenge. And the other part that MiCA regulates besides token issuance is also the service providers. So the service providers, usually the exchanges, custodians, etc., they're going to have the same rules all over Europe. The rules are quite stringent. Looking into what happened with FTX and the previous panel, there are very stringent rules for exchanges. There's a right to redeem. There's also a right that the exchanges need to have a reserve for their assets, and of course they cannot use the customers' assets for anything else, as we have seen in the FTX. So basically, the idea of the European regulator is if MiCA would be applicable, FTX would not happen. I would say to a certain extent that might be true, just because the authorities that are going to oversee this industry, they're going to be more knowledgeable, there's going to be more of them, and they're going to be having all these processes in place that they can look into basically this industry. So I'll stop here. Maybe we can go to the next question.
Yeah, I think what is sort of unfortunate is that, from my experience, a lot of third countries, such as Israel, often think that even though MiCA has primarily the EU and the single market under its scope, that they will therefore not be affected by it. So I think probably a good way to start with that, and then we'll open it up to any questions you guys might have, is to talk a bit about the marketing reverse solicitation rules and how a third-party country could fall under them, even if you're not actually touching any European customers or actively soliciting them. Reverse solicitation basically means that if you're doing anything that could be construed as advertising, like on the internet, for your token launch or product, that would basically put you under the complete purview of the European regulator, and then you'd be in the scope of MiCA, and all the sort of onerous stablecoin regulations would apply in full. Yeah, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but yeah, the travel rule, transfers of budget, but yeah, just in general, marketing is probably the most important one for Israel, I would reckon.
Absolutely. And how we can see and how the regulators look into how the offering to a specific market looks like. So first, if you're using the language of that country, in Europe we have many languages, and this could also be very burdensome. For example, MiCA has not been yet published in the official journal in Europe, just because the lawyer linguists have so much work to do with translating in all these languages. And if you think about it, sometimes it's the first time that they're using specific words, because all of us, of course, use English quite a lot. So that's one thing. And of course, if you're not offering services actively in Europe, but me as a user, I know your service and I want to use it, that is possible. So reverse solicitation is not prohibited, but ESMA and other authorities, so the European Securities Authority, they're going to look into this in very detail. We have seen some practices that have happened after Brexit. For example, some companies that were incorporated in the UK previously were under one market, and now they're like in another market, and they're still offering services in the same way. So ESMA has already issued some papers and some announcement that if this continues, they will probably have different rules under reverse solicitation. And also there was, during the negotiations, the reverse solicitation there was an idea that they would need to prohibit this, but it didn't happen. So it's still possible for you to have a European user if you're not marketing your service there. And maybe what's also important, I think, it's when this is applicable. So when MiCA is going to be something that you will need to worry about, and you still have some time. It has not been voted yet in the parliament, but this is just a very formal procedure. After that, it's going to be published in the official journal, and after that, after 12 months, there will be the parts talking about stablecoin will be applicable, and after 18 months, the other parts talking about the token issuance and other service providers will be applicable. So we're looking into mid 2024 or the end of 2024. So you still have some time. You don't need to worry about right now. But if you're doing any kind of financial projections or any kind of growth projections, growth strategy and scaling, I think at least this is important for you and you will need to take into consideration. The other trend that is happening is that it's not only Europe. So now Europe is first. You can look into what is the design and the mentality behind the European regulator, but then others are coming. There are some activities in the UK, there are some activities in the US, and that is in a way going to be the standard. So that is also something that I think this community will need to embrace and think about what would be the structure and also the strategy, how to move forward with those changes.
Yeah, so I would say we'll open it up to the floor for questions. And what I respect about the Israeli ecosystem is that you guys, unlike many European businesses, are always looking to scale from early on. And so probably you have this more in your considerations than, for example, the Brits sometimes like to stick their head in the sand and pretend it doesn't apply. But please, any questions about what the European market could mean for you? You can be as specific as you like, and we'll be happy to go over the generalities.
there's a ton of them. Most of them, they cannot block people from moving the token. How do you think MiCA will deal with that? And what do you think are going to be the consequences for the protocol if MiCA is not willing to be flexible on that?
Right, so the question was how the stablecoin regulations will apply to the different types and also specific brands of stablecoin, and if there's some kind of uniform application, if I'm understanding correctly, is more or less the question.
Yeah, it's more like the way you issue those tokens is completely different. Like, let's say
Right.
USDT, there's reserves, quote unquote.
All right.
Right.
So you get like a reserve and then you do an issuance mechanism. Okay, so the question is how will the issuance mechanisms that are different between the coins, the different stable coins, be applied to all of them sort of uniformly and fairly, presumably?
And what is MiCA going to do if the token itself cannot be changed?
Right. So if it's immutable, I think maybe, Marina, you want to answer a bit about, they're being pretty strict on algorithmic stablecoins, so maybe that is the best way to answer that question.
Yes, so our organization is a non-profit and we are talking to the European regulators. We have done that since MiCA was issued. It was like 2020 in September. And this part was added in the last part of negotiations. So very late last year in summer. And it was a shock for everyone. Especially the part when they say that you will need to stop issuing the tokens. And how MiCA regulates stablecoins, there are two different kinds of stablecoins. One is called e-money token, and the other one is asset reference tokens. So they already acknowledge that there are two different kinds. And those kinds are how are you denominating the value of this stablecoin? If you are saying, okay, this stablecoin has a value of $1 or €1, it's an e-money token. And if you're saying, oh, there is a bunch, like a basket of different assets that are denominating the value of this, then this is an asset reference token. And they're like a little bit different rules, but very similar to them. Yeah.
What if there's a derivative of another stable coin that is then pegged to a real currency?
I think that there would be the asset reference token because it wants to be very broad as a definition of the asset reference token. It's very clear what an e-money token is because we had an e-money directive before. So there are already companies that have e-money license. But then for the asset reference tokens, they want to do it like in a way that it would be future proof. And it's a very broad as a definition. I don't think they were understanding what they wrote to I think for us it's like very clear, but it is very hard to basically comply with those rules. And I would say that we need more clarity, and we're getting more clarity from the European Securities Agency and for the European Banking Agency. They're writing a lot of guidance right now, and it's called the technical process, so it's the secondary process in this legislative process, and a lot of basically rules that will bring more understanding of how this will be applied. But I would say that the most severe consequence would be if you're not compliant, especially as a stablecoin, most probably the exchanges in Europe are not going to list you. So they're not going to be offering this stablecoin to their users in Europe, and they will need to be the ones to have this, like, I would say, obligation to do a due diligence there. And of course that would have like an enormous effect to the whole ecosystem, especially if we think about DeFi and how stablecoins are used. And I need to add that MiCA is not regulating DeFi. So DeFi is excluded, but what it says is it's excluded only if it's completely decentralized without any intermediaries in between. And I can tell you that most probably what they think is that DAOs do not exist. Or maybe there are one or two, or like very rarely from what they see today. But what's happening is that they're thinking about MiCA 2 already. So they are thinking about the DeFi regulation. And that is going to happen probably, from what I see how the whole process goes, in another 5 to 6 years is going to be applicable or something similar. But it's happening right now. So we are talking to them. We need to talk to them right now. We need to come up with ideas right now to see how this ecosystem will look like in 6 years or 5 years.
Yeah, I would also say that, the focus at the moment is on exchanges and wallets and not so much on DeFi primitives yet, because that is like, maybe a bit difficult to wrestle with for now. But anyway, any other questions? Sure, yeah, please.
Use the microphone.
Sure.
How does MiCA looks at basically NFTs, and how does it approach? How does an entrepreneur approaches that when thinking about opening an entity in Europe?
That's a great question we haven't touched upon. So the NFTs are defined in a specific way. So how we use the term NFTs is not the same as the legal term in MiCA as NFTs. So MiCA specifically says that the approach is looking into the substance, not into the technical ERC standard, which means that if this asset is unique and there's not many assets that are issued in a batch, that means that they're unique and they're not easily interchangeable between them and they don't have a very similar price. That would mean that they're NFTs and they are excluded from the regulations. So they're not regulated. But I think that really the devil is in the details. So what do we mean between like looking into what is interchangeable? And a perspective that we have heard from some regulators is that like some of the most famous NFTs might already be seen as non-NFTs because there's many of them and they can be traded because they have a similar price. So I think this is, again, we'll need more clarity from ESMA and also from the national competent authorities on where is the line.
Right, how many more questions do we have time of? One? Okay, last one. Sure, this guy's had his hand up for a while, please.
I have the same question, but for governance. Hey, it's just the same question, but this time for governance tokens and DAOs.
Yeah, so how MiCA will regulate governance tokens and sort of their issuance and stuff. Okay, great, yeah.
I think that they would understand the governance tokens under generally crypto assets, which means that they're regulated very generally, as I said before, which means that if you issue governance token, you need to write a white paper. If you're not exempt, there are some exemptions, but usually there would need to be a white paper written. And the DAOs, again, the decentralized organizations are excluded, but where is the line? Like, what is decentralized and what is not decentralized? That is the question. Maybe just to add to this, there's not only MiCA, like Europe has been extremely active. We have a whole AML package and there are rules on what information need to be exchanged when there is a transaction between crypto as a service providers. There are a lot of rules, some new rules about how smart contracts need to be designed if they want to be compliant with the Data Act. So you'll hear from us much more, not only from the MiCA side.
And we're all looking forward to it. So thanks very much, guys. Right, great.
Thank you.